Good evening and welcome to another edition of Career Pivots. Last week we heard from Bing Gordon, who took storytelling into the gaming and venture business. Tonight we've got two fabulous storytellers. We have two Yale authors with us. We are so fortunate to have Katherine Hill from the class of 2004 and Beatrice Baresi, otherwise known as Alula, from the class of 2016. Before I introduce them in a little more detail, we've got a couple of housekeeping details to take care of. Jeff, you want to alert us about some upcoming Must See Yalie?
Yeah, well, I'm going to introduce Randy. I think Randy had teed that up, to be honest, so I think he got it in hand. So from Sam to Jeff to Randy. Randy, give us a couple minutes.
Hi, I'm Randy, class of 70. And co-producer with Ben Bartaro. Ben, I've just had a glass of wine. I'm not at my best. So Ben is my co-producer, Bartolome, and he is listening. There he is. Anyway, we are part of Must See Yalie, which every Thursday night at 8 has some sort of a program that features Yale alums. We have 4 different tracks. There's the STEM report, there's life and personal growth, there's the human experience, and then this one, which Ben and I are doing, career pivots. So we are on April 1st today, and we are not fooling. We really are having this program. I would say that Ben and I have planned 2 more programs in the Career Pivot series. I'll just mention them briefly. The next one will be 4 weeks from now, April 29th, and we have 2 coaches. One is Dylan Ngoma, who is a fitness coach, and the other is Nia Holder, who is a life coach. And so we'll talk about the coaching life and how people get into coaching and how they make that work. And then appropriately, we'll end the semester on May 27th with 2 guests. We're both classmates of mine talking about different approaches to retirement. And those guests will be Scott Simpson, who is an architect who doesn't really understand the concept of retirement. And my other classmate is Kim Peterson, who is a physician here in Maine, who, when he retired, he decided he would run a very small sustainable farm instead of practicing medicine. So we got those to look forward to. Put them on your calendar, but every Thursday night at 8. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Sam to get into tonight's program.
Oh, real quick before you jump in, we did want to do a shout out for Cross Campus. Cross Campus is the Yale platform for alumni to engage with each other, and it's really been a fantastic success. There's just thousands and thousands of alumni on it, and students are getting on it. If we can get that link up, we'll put it up in the chat. But I think it's Cross Campus. Chelsea might have to help me. crosscampus.com, I think. I should know this by now. But you'll see it in the chat box soon enough, and I encourage all of you to get on there. It's a lot of fun. So, Sam, your show.
So we are very fortunate to have 2 Yale authors with us tonight. Katherine Hill, as I mentioned, is the class of 2004. She's the author of 2 novels, The Violet Hour, Scribner 2013, and A Short Move, IG Publishing 2020. Also the author of a very interesting critical work. Katherine is an assistant professor of English at Adelphi University, where she teaches creative writing and literature to both undergrads and MFA students. Her writing's been awarded fellowships from the New York Public Library, Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and the Corporation of Yaddo. Katherine was born in Washington, D.C. and now lives in Brooklyn with her husband and daughter. Lula Beatrice Baresi is from the class of 2016 and is about to publish her first book, Berlin. It will be forthcoming in 2022, published by Doubleday in England initially. And the synopsis I'm told, is about a young woman who moves to Berlin to turn over a new leaf. Things begin auspiciously. Daphne has means and brains. She rents a flat and becomes rapidly fluent in German. This may have some correlation to Lula's life. I'm not sure, but perhaps she'll tell us this evening. So we've got a voice of some experience and a new author. We welcome questions. You can put your questions in the chat. And why don't we get going with a kind of a little section from each of you of telling us your story. Katherine, you want to start off?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Sam, for leading this this lovely conversation, and thank you also to Randy Helm for inviting me in the first place. It was a real treat to come back in a way to Yale and speak about the writing life. So I love the title of Career Pivots, I guess, because there was never a career I pivoted from. I've always been a writer, but it's a life of constant pivots, I think. In order to sustain the writing life, you have to make a lot of clever choices with your time and with various ways of finding financial support, which is not always from publishing books, right? They don't tend to be the bill payers. So yeah, I was a creative writing concentrator and English major at Yale, and I spent about 1.5 years in publishing afterwards. Worked at HarperCollins. I was told that's what literary folks do. They go and work in publishing in New York. Some people ahead of me had done that, so I did the same. And I found myself really using that time to kind of gather information about what an author might need to do to survive in the industry rather than an editor. It became pretty apparent to me once I was there. And I went to graduate school, an MFA at Bennington College in Vermont a few years later, and began my first novel in that program. And that program was a low residency program, so I lived in Philadelphia at the time and had a job, but then did this sort of correspondence type work with a mentor and had sort of intensive 10-day sessions several times a year towards the degree. So that actually gave me a really good practice towards balancing paying the bills with writing the novel. So I had like 2 of my 5 work days were novel days, and 3 of the 5 days were speech writing days. I worked as a speechwriter at the University of Pennsylvania. That book, eventually I finished it. I published it in 2013. Spent a couple years freelancing, but mostly living off of that advance. I was really fortunate to be paid for that book. And it bought me years to write the next one. But then that money was going to run out. Freelancing is really hard. Living in Manhattan is super stressful. So I applied. I did my next pivot, I guess, which is to kind of enter the academic job market, which is something you can do once you have a novel out. There are many jobs not many anymore, but there were at the time jobs in creative writing. And there was one at Adelphi University on Long Island. So I applied for that, very fortunately received it, and have been there ever since. Used that job to finish the second novel and the critical collection. And here I am now, going up for tenure. So I've become a sort of writer academic, and that's a really nice living, it turns out, because you have the summers and you have January break, and research, in my case creative work, is part of the job. So there's encouragement and incentives to get more books done. So that's my story.
Well, that's a good one. And why don't, before we start talking about some commonalities between your stories, Lula, why don't you tell us about your journey here?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me this evening. I also found the title Career Pivots interesting, mainly because I think I felt in the time since I graduated from Yale that I had many pivots, but I didn't really consciously see myself as building a career in those pivots. It's only now with a little bit more distance that I see how the very different dots line up. So I went to Yale and graduated in 2016. I went in as a chemistry major and emerged as a philosophy major. So somewhere along the line went towards the humanities. And then having graduated in philosophy, I decided, okay, now it's time for me to gain some very practical knowledge. I want to learn something completely different. And so I started working in coffee shops and learned all about, you know, the trade of coffee and being a barista and understanding coffee selection. And then I moved to Colombia and lived in Medellin for a year and worked in the coffee industry there. But then decided that it probably wasn't the career for me. So came back to Europe, started a degree in Belgium in philosophy, which I dropped out of after a few months because I realized I also didn't want to be in academia. So I was very lost and confused. And so I decided, okay, well, I'm lost and confused. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to move to Berlin because I had this idea of Berlin as a city that was a place full of people lost and confused, not knowing what they were doing, but having a great time. And some of that transpired to be true, and some of it transpired not to be so true. While I was there, I also worked in coffee shops and bars and independent cinemas. And as I was doing that, I wrote on the side and wrote my first and only novel, and wrote it using inspiration from real life events that had happened since I graduated, and I wrote it very quickly in a kind of fever, and for a few months sent it to family and friends, and got only positive feedback because they're my family and friends, and so I was very encouraged. And then I sent it to many agents, and then I didn't hear anything back at all for months and months, and then finally I got an agent in 2019, and then a few months ago I found out that the book is going to be published. So it's very new, very exciting. And this year I've moved from Berlin, and now I'm a master's student at Cambridge in the UK studying philosophy.
Well, we are very appreciative that you are with us tonight from England, from the UK. And so, we had a chance to catch up a little earlier, Katherine and Lula and Randy and I. And I think, one of the things probably a lot of our audience will be interested in is, how do you find kind of a structure, a routine for the writing process? Lula, you want to start off with that one?
Well, I think people can be quite mystical about writing, and sort of I know a lot of people who write who stick very strictly to a routine, or who have certain habits that they need to do before they write. The way that I managed to maintain structure with my writing was to try and set apart hours in the day when I wrote, and without putting pressure on myself by what that writing had to look like. So there are some times when you're writing when you feel wonderfully inspired and very excited, and like you've caught on to the thread of an idea or a plot, and it goes incredibly well. And there are other times when you're uninspired. And one thing that I found useful in terms of creating routine is, even in those uninspired moments, still sticking to writing and focusing on things like, the character descriptions. What does this character like eating? Who's this character's mother? What are their strange mannerisms? And that's something that I found I could really force myself to do in a way that I couldn't force myself to do inspired writing. So I would say, a lot of things count as creative and contributing to your writing work.
Mm-hmm. And Katherine, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the process for me always depends on where I am in a project. Always. I've done this twice now, 2 novels. So there are periods where it was really necessary to be writing every day in order to make headway on a draft, or because I needed to get a revision done in time to get it to somebody. So I think that's one strategy for sure. And actually, it's the one I most recommend for people who are just starting, to commit yourself to a certain time every day, or a certain amount of time, or a certain number of words. Like some little metric that you can maintain that's really low stakes. Like it could be 500 words a day or an hour a day, just to make sure that you build a kind of you actually are developing that muscle of returning to the desk and returning to the project. But truthfully, I am much more of a, you know, binge and purge type person. So I'm not as fast as Lula. Like I've never written a book in a year. They're both for 7-year projects, basically, from very start to very finish. But I got the most work done on them usually at like a residency, you know, where I would go to a, you know, an arts colony or, you know, be invited to someone's house where I had a room and space to work. And, you know, I'd really buckle down and get a lot done in those periods. Those are some of my most generative times. So yeah, it just depends on where you are in the project.
We've got a question that's come in from Rob Greenlee, I guess directing this to you, Katherine. Would you chat a little bit about the relationship between speech writing and novel writing?
Yeah, gosh, it's like a really long time ago now. But I remember what I said then, and I think it's still true, is that in order to keep myself entertained, I did often think of my my provost and my dean, that was who I was writing for, as characters, and they weren't necessarily you know, the most sensational characters I'd ever written. They had very you know, particular missions always on the page, but they had voices that were distinct. And they would say things certain ways, and I had to make sure that I was able to produce language that would match that, and that would basically anticipate what they might say, so that they weren't performing themselves; they were actually speaking as themselves. So that was sort of the parallel. There's also a lot of research involved in speech writing, and that's true for novel writing as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, when you started out, Katherine, did you go the agent route as Lulu did? Did you send out to multiple agents?
Yes, you have to have an agent to publish a novel with a major house. So yeah, when I finished the book in 2012, I solicited probably 10 agents, I think, based on recommendations from friends in the industry. And yes, I think like Lula, I had 2 offers quite quickly. I actually was really lucky. My book, it hit some nerve at the time of the sale, and I got excited responses from agents. And then the one I chose sent it out, and I got, you know, a pretty quick deal within a few weeks. So it all happened over the course of a few months in 2012.
And was it easier the second time around?
No, much harder.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, my second book is more experimental. So my first book is like a multi-generational family saga set in a funeral home mostly, and there's, you know, divorce and sex, and, you know, it's like everybody wants to read this. My second novel, I also thought everyone would want to read, but apparently there was mixed opinion about that. It's about a football player. It's a life narrative of an NFL player, and I love it. It's my baby, but I think it was a strange match of categories. You know, sports, but quite decidedly literary fiction. So we actually had a really hard time selling that one. I got rejected by every single publisher in New York, probably twice, before I found IG, and they loved the book immediately. It's an independent press, and they put it out, and, you know, got a New York Times Critics' Choice review for me. So it's not. It was a different route for sure than the first one. I only get royalties. I did not get an advance for the second one, but it's nonetheless my career. So.
And Lulu, we have a participant asking if you're already at work on a second book.
Yes, I am. When I sent out my first book, they said, you know, my agent said, try and have a synopsis for something else, because they might purchase that too, or they may make an offer on it, which they did. The next book I've got is a story, a sort of modern Rosemary's Baby, if people are familiar with that story. So the story of a unexplained pregnancy, which I'm not currently writing as I'm finishing my philosophy thesis, but which I'm very excited to start.
Okay, wow, that's
Awesome.
You know, leads me, of course, to a question. I mean, how do you balance your academic pursuits and your newfound publishing success?
Well, I wonder, you know, this is very new to me, so I'm just finding a way of doing it. I have to say that it's something that I find difficult. I find that the part of my brain that is required for philosophy, so writing philosophy essays, is very similar to the part of my brain that I need to use for creative work. And while I'm writing something, a dissertation in philosophy, I can't do the creative work. So I'm at a stage at the moment, you know, where I am not really yet in an established academic career, and where I'm deciding whether, you know, whether an academic career works alongside writing for me. I'm not sure that it does, but I'm trying to figure that out at the moment.
It definitely does not for everyone. That's I think a lot of people actually burn out on the responsibilities of the job of you know, professor, and find it difficult to do the writing that they actually want to do, depending on if you're at a, you know, a heavy teaching institution. It's all about the placement. My critical work was sort of is creative, kind of. The critical book that I published is a work of essays with three scholars. I'm the novelist. 3 literary scholars about Elena Ferrante's novels, the Neapolitan Quartet. And that book is academic. It's published by an academic publisher. It's a study of these novels, but we wrote it deliberately in a kind of personal essay style, and by exchanging letter essays to each other. We called them letters, and as we read the books. And so that was sort of I do book criticism too, so it felt like an extension of that kind of writing that I do, and it was often helpful to have this collaborative project that I was very excited about with friends, as a kind of back and forth. I don't know. It was, you know, cheating on my novel with my critical project, and then cheating on my critical project with my novel. You know, I could bounce back and forth. When one got boring, there was the other one there waiting for me. So.
In the process of that writing that book, did you decide who actually wrote the Ferrante novels?
No, I do not want to know. I mean, I do know because it's known, but it's not of interest to me. And we talk about that a lot, actually, among ourselves. I don't think we address it in the book as much, but I think all 4 of us are quite happy to think of Ferrante as the pseudonym that she has chosen to be, rather than a real person.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So, you know, I suppose I should ask, really talk a little bit about, for those who are with us this evening, who, as Randy observed, you know, a lot of people think, oh, I have a book in me somewhere, and at some point I'll have time to write it, as if that just is going to unfold naturally in some way. But for those who are participating tonight who think they might have a book in them, some advice from each of you in turn? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll go first. Well, you know, I teach MFA students, so every year I supervise, you know, 1 or 3 books. You know, they do keep happening, and I love when people write to me and ask me, you know, how they might arrange their lives. But I just say you have to make the time. It is a process, and it's a practice, right? The same way an athletic pursuit, if you want to get really good at running a mile, you have to run every day. If you want to grow a garden, you have to get your dirt and your seeds and get to work. So I do think it's a practice and a process, just like any of those things. And yeah, I don't think you have to be a career writer in order to write a good book, but you do have to be a reader. You have to read the kinds of books that you want to write. You have to know what those are. I think is the first thing, right? You want to write a mystery novel. Okay, so you have to read a lot of mystery novels. You want to write a stream of consciousness, you know, novel that really captures the feeling of 21st century. You have to read Virginia Woolf, and then, you know, everyone since who's written in that style. So I think that's what I tell my students anyway, and that's the advice I would give.
Lula, how about you? Advice for the would-be author?
Yeah, I would say I think one of the most important things that kept me motivated before I, ever had an agent or any sort of external affirmation for my writing was it was finding that affirmation in having a kind of group of ministering angels who will read your work and encourage you. So that for me included friends, family, anyone who I could sort of convince to read what I was writing. And I would say for me, especially at the beginning, it was very important that those people be encouraging. One of the things that I see a lot amongst, people I know and my friends who are, just starting to write is that they want to improve. And so they're very self-critical at an early stage. And I think that that's sort of, snipping your wings before you've taken flight. I think at the early stage, it's really important to have affirmation and to delight yourself and to delight, your group of readers. So my advice would be find some, loyal people who'll read your work and encourage you.
Another question I guess we kind of ought to cover here. There's such a focus these days on STEM, if you will, in college, community college. When I speak often on, AI and the impact on our lives, one of the questions, I get just most commonly from parents, grandparents is, oh my gosh, what are my children, grandchildren going to do when everything is run by algorithms and automation? And then I have some people who volunteer, well, you can be a writer because that'll never be able to do that. And I point out a lot of sports articles, financial articles are already written by algorithm to people's quite astoundment. But what do you say when you get, well, Katherine, I mean, you're teaching, you've got undergrads at Adelphi who come to you probably are thinking of being an English major maybe, or not sure.
Yep.
What do you tell them to encourage them?
I mean, yeah, I advise, a good chunk of them every year. For one thing, there are many careers in which writing is a prized quality. So both in business, if that's your orientation, but certainly teaching, you're still teaching the English language, and often an English major is a really nice step towards that. But also certainly, law school, and just really any career where you're trying to communicate with other people, having a background in critical thinking and writing is quite prized. I never had anybody, I mean, I found a lot of jobs I was not expecting to get, I think, as a result of my preparation at Yale. So, I mean, the speechwriting job at Penn literally fell in my lap. I sent my resume to Penn Press, I think, because I had worked in publishing, and somebody there sent it to the provost's office when they were looking for a speechwriter, and they called me up and said, "You seem like a person who could write speeches. Would you like to do this job?" So, I think I'm not so special, like that could happen to anyone with an English major who can write a good cover letter. So.
And this was at Wharton, as I recall.
What?
This was at Wharton, right? It
was first the provost's office and then at Wharton. Yeah, I did both.
And Lulu, what would you tell? You've graduated more recently. I mean, have you kind of had people say to you, question you about your chosen path here?
Well, I think, I still wonder about this question. In some ways, I'm not the best advertisement for a, humanities major, having spent the last 5 years mainly kind of, working in hipster coffee shops, which I'm not sure would be great advertisement for anyone graduating in philosophy. But I think, fun, and also my situation wasn't quite the same as Katherine's. When I came to Europe, which is where I live, it hasn't been very easy for me to find jobs with the degree that I have, because Europe, well, depending on the country within which you are, it is a society where people tend to have particular trainings even within the humanities. So if you want to be a journalist, for example, in Europe, they often expect you to have a master's in journalism. There isn't the openness that there is in the US. But I think the only answer I can really give to that is, I've really done what I've enjoyed. And although that hasn't always translated to, you know, the most easy or brilliant career outcomes, I've really enjoyed myself and loved the material that I've been wrestling with. And, you know, so I enjoy what I'm doing very much. That's what I would say to someone hesitating about the humanities. Yeah, but I think maybe still quite early to tell for me.
You know, I do talk, I was an English major at Yale, and I have often responded to that question myself by talking about my incredible experience in William K. Wimsatt's seminar on literary criticism my junior year. And he was such a, you two are probably too young to have experienced the William K. Wimsatt. Randy, I don't know about you. Randy, did you know Mr. Wimsatt? Well, he was a formidable guy. He was about, gosh, he must have been about 6'8", and he'd been a boxer at one time, and he had these huge hands and fingers that were just all gnarled from apparently punching people. But his seminar was, he was absolutely kind of terrifying. There was about 12 of us in it, and you know, we would scrawl this. We had, his exams were legendary, and we'd kind of have these, you know, we had blue books then, believe we wrote out our exams. But that class, I think, taught me more about critical thinking and writing than almost anything I did at Yale. In fact, he would correct our papers in longhand himself. And it was a very humbling experience, shall we say. But I learned a tremendous amount. And I found when I went off to law school, I mean, I had become quite a good writer. I was actually surprised. And it's helped me, you know, my whole life. And so I kind of recount that, you know, for others, which is a little bit of a segue to another question we have here. Showing your drafts to friends and family, to administering angels. Do you do that as you work on it? Do you wait until you're kind of finished? What's your, Katherine, what do you do in your?
Yeah, I love what Lula says about having encouraging friends early on. I think that's actually really, you know, you say you're quite new at it, Lula, but I think that's a really wise position to have. And I think I didn't really have it actually early on. I was very private about my work. I didn't want to show it to any family or friends until I felt like it was really good. So I was quite hard on myself. I had workshops in grad school, so I had to share it with my classmates, but I always was like, oh, this is just in progress. Like we're not taking this too seriously. But there was something about showing it to a friend or family member that made it, yeah, just raised the stakes for me. So yeah, I think that's a really good thing to do, to cultivate a writing group of generous people. But also I think, friends who are generous, but also actually a writing group, like people who are also writing and who have the writing, the writer's eye and the writer's ear that they can bring to your work. I think that's maybe one of the most important things, people you can trade work with, so that you do them a favor, they do you a favor.
And Lula, would you share, as you worked on your book, Berlin, would you share it with your friends?
Yeah, I would share a lot. I would send paragraphs to people who I knew would like them. I mean, I only sent what I thought was great, because I only, at that stage of my writing, you know, I understood that I needed positive feedback. I was protective. I wasn't private about the work, but I was protective in terms of what kind of commentary I would let it, you know, be subjected to. The only thing I would say about sharing things with friends is that I think one must be careful not to share the story so much that one doesn't feel the need to write it anymore. Which I've not had, you know, I haven't had with the novel, I didn't have it, but I have had it with a short story that I recently had in mind that I got incredibly excited about. And I kept telling everyone, it's going to be so good, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And that, you know, and now I've slightly lost that urgency to actually write it. So my advice would be, you know, don't tell away the story, you know, wait until you've written it down before sharing.
And is your approach to, do you actually kind of outline your work and then outline characters and their traits? How do you go about that, Katherine?
Yeah, different for each book. The first book, I had a really sort of explosive opening situation that launched me into the novel, and I didn't know where it was going, and I wrote the novel kind of to find out. But the second book, I had a very clear, I wrote one section that I thought was a short story, and then an editor who published that piece asked me if it was part of something larger. And I sort of, it's like sometimes you just need someone to ask you that question. And she did, and I thought, oh, maybe I will write about another, write about this other character. And then I had two sections that I kind of became two nodes on a line, and I filled that line in basically with an outline that I then largely stuck to writing that novel. So that was a delightful discovery that I could outline, because it wasn't my natural process. My natural process was definitely to go in on not knowing, like only having characters and situation and questions. So the current book I'm maybe going to write that I'm just really, really, really very, very new at, I'm writing lots of background right now on the people, trying to figure out who they are to each other before I find the form. I don't think I have the form yet. I just am kind of doing the biographies, I think.
And Lulu, you described kind of writing Berlin in a fever. That mean you kind of produced it organically as you went, or did you have more of a structure in mind, whether committed to paper or not?
No, I mean, that first novel was, I felt like I was, sort of a medium for a story that already existed. It was a really amazing experience, where I just wrote and followed a thread blindly, not knowing where it was leading. That was a wonderful experience, but I don't think that kind of inspiration can be relied upon. So now I do, as I'm writing, I am plotting more. I plot when I am uninspired, and when I'm anxious about the writing and feeling like it won't go well because it doesn't feel particularly stressful or taxing to think about what kind of, one of my minor characters, what TV does he watch and what music he's into. That sort of doesn't require me to be in a particular writing mood. I can do that anytime. So I do it when I'm less inspired.
And I see we have a question about, what workshops or residencies would you recommend to people interested in writing?
The Center for Fiction in Brooklyn is really wonderful. Also, A Public Space is a small literary magazine that has some really nice workshops. They have a novel writing workshop. That's one of the few that's repeated every year. It's really great. If you want to go somewhere when that's allowed again, Bread Loaf in Vermont is great. There used to be the Tin House Writers Workshop. I don't know if they still do that. And Sewanee Writers Conference in Tennessee are those are the ones that off the top of my head I can think of. There's so many. I think, the ones that are associated with really excellent literary magazines or with universities tend to be among the best.
And I know you were at Bennington for a while. Is that right? Am I correct?
Yes. Well, that was my graduate degree.
Graduate degree.
So the question I was just answering was about
right.
part-time, just doing a conference or a workshop.
And I think Iowa has a great, writers in residency program at least, or I don't know.
That's a graduate program as well. Yes, the oldest one in the country, the Iowa Writers Workshop. So a lot of the MFA programs are called writers workshops or writing seminars, but they actually are graduate programs. So Bennington and Iowa both give you the MFA degree, whereas Center for Fiction and Tin House and Bread Loaf are all just sort of retreats, basically.
Lulu, any thoughts there to add, perhaps in England or in Europe that you're familiar with?
Well, I actually have not been to any writing workshop, or I haven't had any experience like that. The only experience I had was when I was at Yale. I did the Daily Themes program, which I think I'm sure still exists actually. And I loved that, you have to write, you get a theme prompt every day and it forces you to write a lot. But apart from that, I don't have experience of workshops.
What about, we have another question about how have you seen your voice develop beyond improving over time, how it's affected and what's influenced it? Lulu, you want to start off with that one?
I think develop over time is hard because I haven't written that much. I've written a novel and then a few short things, so I don't have a sense of enough work to having a idea of progression. But what I know has influenced my voice the most is the novels that I've loved. I think, as Katherine was saying, you know, my favorite novels, I try and really think about what's so wonderful about them and to emulate them. So I definitely copy things from novels, copy certain tones, themes, ways of portraying characters. So I think reading has made a huge difference to my writing.
Mm-hmm. Katherine?
Yes, absolutely the same. Yeah, my influencers are what I've read and what I'm reading. You know, it's hard to know what my career will look like overall, but so far I can definitely see that, you know, my first novel was strongly influenced by not just the books I read in my senior seminar on doomed love, but also a lot of the things that I've been reading in college. You know, Shakespeare, Virginia Woolf, like that was all in there. And the second book was a lot more, you know, it moved forward in time with me. And so the reading that I was doing in those years really influenced it. Jennifer Egan's novel, A Visit from the Goon Squad, was really important for that work. And I don't know, I was reading some Ovid around then too, The Metamorphosis. That was really important for that work. Michael Apted's 7 Up films about, which is like a series of films from England, starting in, I think, like late 1950s, that tracks a generation of children from age 7, then age 14, then age 21, then age 28. And I think they got all the way up to like 63 last year. That kind of time lapse portrait of life was really important for me when thinking about the second book. So it's not just what I read, it's also other art forms that are narrative, a lot of films.
It's interesting. So we have a couple of questions about, first of all, how do you approach agents in each of your case? How did you have the courage, the wherewithal to, you know, embark on that kind of daunting prospect?
Well, you have to be done with the book. That's like the first, if you're a novelist. It's not true for nonfiction writers, I think. They tend to sell their books on proposal. But if you're going to sell a novel, you have to have made it the very best novel you possibly can, and just there's nothing left you can do to it. And then, yeah, then you send a really short query letter to as many agents as you can. I definitely talked to people who knew about book publishing. That was really important, you know, to like everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. So like find the person closest to you who you can ask this question of, who might be able to give you some recommendations of who to pitch. But there is also, I'm gonna actually look this up and drop it in the chat. There's a really great resource on Poets and Writers magazine that is a database of all the literary agents, and a really excellent sort of introduction to how to go about, like what an agent does, how to know if you're being, you know, what an agent does, what to expect, what's legitimate, what's reasonable, and also how to pitch. There's like a really great little query letter template there that I followed to a T.
And Lulu, what was your approach? Did you use any online or other resources like this to find agents and so forth?
No, I mean, I just sort of typed in agents sort of to the internet, and I did not have a very refined strategy. I sent out probably around 40 or 50, and I just developed this strategy where every time I would get a rejection, I would send out, and I would send it out to another agent. It's like a kind of way, you know, of having, I don't know, it was a sort of depressing, very slow tennis match where I would get it thrown back at me and I'd be like, okay, putting it back out there. So it took a while and it took a really large number, because out of that 40 or 50, I got loads of rejections, loads of no answer, and 2 acceptances. And so, you know, it was high volume, and yeah, sometimes that's what's necessary. I sometimes see people being very targeted about who they send their novels to, and investing a lot of time in finding the perfect agent for them, or where they think it would really fit. And you know, it's very unpredictable to know whether an agent's going to have time for you at that particular moment. There are so many variables that we cannot see from, you know, this side of things, that I would say, you know, send it to many people, yeah, as many as you feel up to.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
And I gather from speaking to some authors that I know, my oldest son was dating one for quite a while, just got her MFA at Columbia, but she was telling me that a lot of the agents, their house, so to speak, focuses on a kind of particular style of fiction or perhaps nonfiction. Is this right? Are there agencies known for certain kinds of works, Katherine?
Well, most of the most agencies cover all the categories, and it's just individual agents who will specialize. But even so, it's rare for an agent to only do one category. They'll usually have a couple that they pick, that they like. I think a good strategy actually is to look at the acknowledgements pages of books that you really admire. That will often lead you towards agents who at least would be likely to share your taste or to represent your categories. And that could be part of your, you know, the research that you do as you put together a list. It's also true that now agencies it's just a lot more transparent than it used to be, even than when I was submitting in 2012. There are frequently now biographies and photos of the agents on the agent websites that tell you what their titles are, who they represent, and what they are looking for. So Lula's right, like you don't know if they're actually looking for something now, or what kind of book they'd be looking for now. And that decision is usually about, you know, the money they need to make at any given time. But you can at least get a sense of what type of book they would be interested in. So you're not pitching a literary novel to someone who really exclusively does children's fiction, for example.
Did either of you consider at any point self-publishing?
I do not have the skills for that. No.
Lula?
No. I didn't. I mean, I considered, you know, printing it off, getting it laminated and sending it to all my friends and await their admiring comments, but I didn't think of self-publishing really.
I have another question. I see a couple of things are coming in. Oh, here's a good one. Interesting. So people who might be considering an MFA in creative writing, what would you advise on that front? We have someone who teaches MFA, right? Yeah. So Katherine?
I mean, yeah, it changed my life, and it is my life now. So yes, by all means, get an MFA. It's wonderful. It is. I mean, it gives you that writing community, right? If you make friends and colleagues in your program who could potentially be your writing group for life, and it also introduces you to the life of the writer, you know, in the most direct way. I think. You know, it's a big time commitment. It's a graduate program, so you have to know if you have the time and the discipline for that and the readiness for it. But I definitely recommend it. And there's so many programs now. I mean, I think that's one challenge is figuring out which programs would be most suitable for you. And that's usually about the faculty. Like, who do you want to study with? You know, which writers do you want to be around a seminar table with, and whose input do you want?
You know, I have kind of a granular question. Do you write on a computer? Do you write longhand, both? Lulu, what's your approach?
I do, yeah, I write on a computer. I edit longhand, so I always print, you know, I print off whatever I'm doing and then I rework it. But as I'm writing, yeah, computer, always.
And how about you, Katherine?
Yeah, mostly computer, but I have written some things in longhand, some shorter pieces or exercises towards a revision of some kind, you know, like work around the work is often done longhand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, one thing I think I've often thought about is I sit before an image of the Beinecke Rare Book Library, where I did some research when I was at Yale, but with people writing using Word, or, well, I don't know what you're using, what application, but do you feel like do you keep successive editions or versions, or are you always working on one that's the most current and in effect kind of lose your prior versions?
I love that question. Yeah, I mean, I have many, there's always like 4 or 5 drafts, but each one of those is actually like a draft and a half or 2 drafts because there's so many revisions that go into each draft. It's sort of arbitrary when I decide a new draft is starting. And I have printed several of them along the way. So that sometimes feels more real to me. Like, this is draft 1, here it is. But yeah, I have definitely, I have wondered about that. The way that digitization makes the drafting question a little foggier.
Looks like Jeff has a question.
I figured I'd ask a live question, mix it up a little bit.
Ooh.
And the chat. I've always wondered when you're writing these novels, how do you know when you're done?
Yeah. You just can't do anymore.
Like to finish.
I think that's how, because you've already reached the end, right? Like, the end happened. It's not like that's how you know it's done, or at least for me, it was not because I wrote the last sentence. It was because all the sentences had reached their perfect form, and all of the questions that I thought needed to be addressed were addressed, and I just couldn't look at it anymore.
How about you, Lula? How do you know when you're finished with Berlin? Was it clear, or?
So I think I thought it was finished before my editor thought that it was. I don't know if I'm the best judge of that. I think well now that I've had an editor look at it and help me with it, I think there is a kind of the level of satisfaction that I didn't have with the previous drafts. I think also you get to a stage where the current feeling I have towards the novel is like, a child who I feel very fond of, but now I'm like, now it is, you must fly the nest and survive in the wild. I think when you lose that kind of possessive obsessiveness over the novel, which I had as I was writing it, then I'm like, okay, now time to part with this.
Okay. So I also feel like I've got to ask you about, I think it was about 1998. I was involved with Pete DuPont. I co-founded a second venture-funded internet company and had an idea. We approached Tom Clancy about writing a internet serial novel, we called it, which we'd publish on our e-zine, intellectualcapital.com, in kind of every other week editions, if you will, with input from the audience and with now please don't fall off your chairs, but when Jack Ryan went to his closet, there would be sponsored clothes in, I guess. Anyway, well, Clancy was in the middle of trying to buy an NFL franchise and getting divorced, and he said he had no time to even begin to think about such a thing. Have either of you thought about kind of some sort of non-linear, audio book or screenwrites or some sort of a serial approach?
I think about different forms for sure, but I have not done any work towards that. That's all I can say. So I don't even want to claim it, but I am curious about the way that the medium changes the story, and that is something that I talk to many writer friends about, and maybe we'll do one day, but not immediately.
Well, I guess your creative work is an interesting approach, actually.
The critical work, you mean? Yeah.
Critical work. Yeah, I'm sorry. Critical, yes.
Yeah, it's epistolary, which is, a little uncommon. Yeah.
How about you, Lula? Have you thought about experimenting in some sort of I would say, I guess, non-linear form?
Honestly, I haven't, because I am just old-fashioned in I'm very attached to a linear, gripping, satisfying narrative. So and those are my favorite kinds of books. So maybe that's something that, later on I'll take an interest in. I've definitely, technology and texts and emails and WhatsApp and Facebook and all these things are really important in my writing. And, in terms of create, I'm really interested in trying to mirror the sort of very banal reality of what it is to be a conscious human in a day in 2020, for example. And so all these things intermingle in my writing, but I haven't done something non-linear or very experimental.
And we've got a question that's come in that I'm actually not familiar with at all. I'm sure you will be, but do you recommend engaging a developmental editor?
Before getting an
I
agent?
guess before querying agents, or?
I mean, I don't actually recommend that, but I've heard people do it and think, I've heard great, people have had great experience with that. But my recommendation is the band of writers. Get yourself a band of writers to read your work and serve as each other's developmental editors.
Lula?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you don't have someone people in your life who are giving you that readerly community for your work, and then why not? It's something, it's a great thing to have someone who's really interested in your work and really invested in it. And I think it's like a great gift to give yourself if you can. I don't think there's anything wrong about it at all.
Oh, I agree. It's definitely, yes, yeah. It's a great thing to do if you can. But I always think the friend part is nice too.
Anything else you two would like to kind of volunteer for our audience? In terms of anything, open question here.
No, I can't wait to read Lula's book. I'm really looking forward to next year. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think something that I would say is I remember that when I was at Yale, I had a real sense of people being formed for the thing they were going to become. And I guess Career Pivot's what this series is about. It's about showing that, you change career and a lot of people do it. But when I was younger, I projected myself forward into a kind of linear narrative. And I thought, well, I'm not a writer now when I'm at college, so I'll never be a writer. And I think that also comes from the fact that the writer is a kind of mystified being. We do that with a lot of mystique and, the writing process itself. And so I'd say, if you enjoy writing, delight yourself. That's the most important thing. Secondarily, success, but that should never be the aim. The aim should be enjoying it, and it should be an end into itself. And that's how I've kept going and enjoying myself.
Yeah, I love that. If you're a writer, if you write, you're a writer, and you'll be pivoting constantly.
I love that. Randy, how about you? You've written in your life, certainly.
Yes, my preferred genre is the memo. I have written many memos in my life, and one mystery novel which I didn't finish because my sabbatical ran out, and now it's on it's wherever it is on whatever hard drive it's in, a version of Microsoft Word that isn't supported anymore. So I'm afraid it's lost forever, and I don't know who did it. Anyway, so.
Well, and I suppose we should really mention, speaking of hard drives, Katherine and Lula, you back up regularly, right, to an external hard drive?
Dropbox. Mm-hmm.
Dropbox, there we
Dropbox.
go. Okay, yeah.
And Google Drive, both. Yes.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to lose it, right?
Nope.
That would be devastating. Ooh.
Nightmare. Can't even think about it. Yeah.
And I assume you encourage your students to do the same, Katherine?
Yes. Required.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're approaching the end of our hour, and I thank you both so much. How is it best for people to reach you with any questions or follow-up?
I have a website. I can put that in there.
That'd be great. And Lula, how about you? What, if you're open to being reached, what would you?
Yeah, absolutely. My email, I guess I can type it into the chat afterwards if people have access. Do people have access to the chat after the talk?
I'm not sure if that chat's available, but
we put them up there quick, but everyone will see it now.
Yeah, if you could type it in now, people can see it.
Yeah.
Screenshot it probably.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Got it.
Depending on how adept we are at taking that quick snapshot.
Right.
Well, I want to thank you both again
Thank
so
you.
much for participating in our series. And it's been really delightful to get to know each of you. I look forward to reading, I have a particular interest in reading A Short Move and then Berlin when it
Okay.
comes out. Thank you so much for being with us. Jeff, any final thoughts before we sign off for tonight?
Yeah, as always, thank you. The guests were tremendous. It's always very interesting, and I find the topics just exhilarating. I'm a STEM person, and when we organize this, I sort of thought I'd focus on the STEM shows, but I get so much out of these other shows. It's just great. So thanks for your time. It's always a Must See Yalie, and we have both of you tonight, so that's fun. And hope to see everybody next Thursday. You know, we've got another couple of months, and then we go into summer programming. We'll talk about that. But thanks, and thanks, Sam. It was a great show.
Well, listen, everybody, please, we are all living in this quite astounding, horrific pandemic, global pandemic. Please take care of yourselves and each other. Have some compassion for people. I always say be patient. You never know what people have just suffered or gone through. And let's all watch out for each other and have a wonderful holiday weekend here coming up. And we'll see you next Thursday night.
Thanks, guys. Happy holidays.